The woman who outsmarted Hitler twice. In the heart of Vienna in 1933, there was a woman the world was trained not to see. She wasn't royalty. She wasn't wealthy. She wasn't loud. But she moved like she belonged in every room, because she knew how not to be remembered. She was small, slight, almost plain to look at least at first. But behind her eyes was a mind sharper than any weapon the Nazis would ever build. Her name was Vera, though that wouldn't be the name on any of her papers. And by the time Hitler rose to power, she was already 3 identities deep. Vera was born into a world unraveling. The aftermath of World War I had left Europe fractured, bitter, and desperate. And in those broken pieces, ideologies grew like weeds, some radical, some dangerous, and one that would change history forever. While most of the world watched the rise of fascism with confusion or fear, Vera studied it like a game. She didn't trust politicians. She didn't wait for newspapers to tell her what was happening. She watched train stations, eavesdropped on cafe whispers, listened for silence where there should have been music. She could tell what was coming, not because she had a crystal ball, but because she was listening when the rest of the world was sleeping. By 1934, Vera had quietly slipped into the inner circles of Austria's underground resistance. Not because someone recruited her, because she chose it. She walked into their cellar meeting in a trench coat 2 sizes too big, handed them stolen documents she hadn't been asked to find, and said, "I thought these might be useful." No one knew who she was, but they knew immediately she was dangerous, in the best possible way. While the men of the resistance argued about pamphlets and slogans, Vera was already planting stories in Nazi sympathizers' ears. She understood something no one else did yet, that this wasn't just a war of bullets. It would be a war of stories, of rumors, of perception, and she was ready to weaponize all 3. The first time she crossed a border, she had a forged passport, a French accent, and a hollowed-out hairbrush filled with microfilm. She didn't flinch when the guards stopped her. She smiled, flirted just enough to stay unmemorable, and walked into Germany carrying information that would save dozens of lives. She was 24. By 1938, the world had changed. The swastika now hung over Austria, and Vera disappeared. To everyone else, she vanished, but in reality, she changed. Vera knew she couldn't operate as herself anymore, so she became Elise, a Jewish housekeeper in Berlin. No one looked at housekeepers, especially not poor ones, especially not during a time when Jews were being erased from public life. She was a ghost, living inside the regime, sweeping floors while eavesdropping on conversations that made generals sweat. It wasn't just risky, it was suicide. But Vera didn't believe in fear. She believed in purpose. And she believed she could outwit Hitler. She wasn't a spy with an organization behind her. She wasn't MI6. She wasn't OSS. She was alone, entirely self-taught. But her instincts were flawless. She could read a man by the way he touched his belt. She could tell who had power in a room before anyone opened their mouth. She used silence like a sword, and charm like a shield. She memorized train schedules, military rotations, officer patterns, and she learned how to pass information through coded recipes, hidden ink inside laundry lists, and double-stitched hems. But what made her unstoppable wasn't just her genius. It was that no one thought to stop her, because no one thought a woman like her, a servant, a Jew, a nobody, could outsmart the Reich. But she did, and she was just getting started. They say the best assassins never touch a weapon. Vera didn't need to. Her weapon was timing, precision, and the Nazis' own arrogance. By the winter of 1939, she wasn't just gathering information, she was dismantling it, one whispered instruction at a time. Vera, still posing as Elise, the Jewish housekeeper, was now embedded in the Berlin residence of a mid-level Gestapo officer. He thought she didn't speak much German. He thought she was harmless. He thought a lot of things. And every time he thought them, Vera used it against him. She kept the floors spotless and the curtains open. She folded his uniforms and pressed his boots. She listened. Every word, every visitor, every careless threat that dripped from his lips after too many glasses of schnapps. She took it all in and sent it out. Through coded letters to a sick cousin, through bakery orders with one too many numbers, through the laundress who passed through each week, a laundress who never asked questions, but always left with just a little more linen than she came with. Vera didn't just collect information. She rerouted couriers, delayed trucks, switched schedules. In March of 1940, she altered a shipping manifest from inside her employer's office while he slept off a hangover. That manifest rerouted an entire supply chain of ammunition to a dock that didn't exist. It was marked as a clerical error, but Vera knew better. That moment cost the Nazis 3 weeks of operations in eastern France. No bullet, no bomb, just one woman, a fountain pen, and a stolen key. But her quiet war didn't stay quiet for long. The Gestapo started whispering about a mole, a ghost, a whisper thief. They didn't know who she was, but they were getting closer. And in May 1940, her name appeared on a list. Not her real name, not Vera, but Elise, the housekeeper, the nobody. Someone had noticed. That night, Vera didn't sleep. She packed a small satchel, a forged identity, a lipstick that contained a blade, a locket with a microfilm image of a map showing the rail lines leading into Poland, lines the Nazis wanted hidden from the world. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She left. No one saw her go. When the Gestapo knocked on the officer's door the next morning, Elise was gone. The uniforms were still pressed, the floors still spotless, but the woman who had cost them dozens of lives had vanished like fog in sunlight. Vera resurfaced 6 months later in occupied Paris. This time, she wasn't pretending to be a servant. She became a French socialite, widow of a minor diplomat. A new accent, a new haircut, a new name, Claire. She wore satin gloves and smoked thin cigarettes. She dined with German officers and charmed them with sad eyes and soft laughter. They had no idea they were feeding war secrets to the most dangerous woman they'd never heard of. Because now Vera wasn't just passing messages. She was building a network. Women like her, invisibles, seamstresses, secretaries, barmaids, each trained to listen, memorize, and pass along fragments of plans, train timetables, officer movements. Together, they became a web stretched tight across enemy territory. And Vera sat in the center. She was hunted now. The Nazis knew she existed. She had no margin for error. One wrong word, one flash of recognition, and everything would collapse. But Vera thrived in that chaos. The closer danger got, the calmer she became. In October of 1941, she arranged her boldest act yet, the extraction of a young British pilot held in a makeshift prison in the heart of Paris. It wasn't just a rescue. It was a message that no prison was too guarded, no secret too protected, that the resistance was alive and smarter than ever. She posed as a nurse, got herself assigned to the prison's medical rotation. She studied schedules, bribed a guard's sister with medicine for her sick child, memorized the electrical patterns of the security lights. It took 12 days. On the 13th night, the lights went out for 9 seconds. When they came back on, the British pilot was gone. Vera was too. By 1942, the world was bleeding. Cities fell like dominoes and Hitler looked unstoppable. But in the shadows of occupied Europe, one woman was unraveling the war from the inside. Vera, now Claire, to her allies in Paris, had risen beyond the role of spy. She was a strategist, a tactician, a symbol, not because she wanted to be, because there was no one else who could do what she was about to do. The Nazis were planning something massive. She could feel it in the change of behavior. Fewer troops visible on the streets, more officers traveling by night. New maps, folded too carefully. Something was coming. and the world wasn't ready. That's when she heard it. A whisper in a drunken officer's rambling, Die Festung Europa, Fortress Europe, a coastal wall of death meant to stop any Allied invasion cold. Fortified bunkers, anti-aircraft zones, thousands of landmines stretching from Norway to the south of France. It wasn't rumor. It was real, and no one outside the Reich knew just how vast it was. Vera's mission was clear. She had to get the blueprint. There was only one copy that mattered, kept inside the temporary military archives housed in a secure chateau outside Rouen. Not on paper, not even photographed. It was a dynamic war board, rotating projections, updates in real time based on intelligence from the front. She needed to see it. And she had 72 hours before it was transferred to Berlin. Her team told her not to go. It was too risky, too obvious. But Vera was never afraid of fire. She studied it, mastered its rhythm, and walked through it when others turned away. She disguised herself as a visiting Belgian interpreter for the German High Command. She studied regional dialects for 2 days straight, memorized hand signals used by dispatch runners, and she carried with her the smallest camera known at the time, disguised as a brooch on her lapel. She got in. The room was everything she feared, guarded, coded, and crawling with suspicion. She pretended to be uninterested. She asked questions she already knew answers to. And then, in one perfect moment of distraction, a soldier spilled wine on the map table. She captured the image. One photo. 1 second. That's all she needed. She slipped out as the sun set. By the time the guards realized a file had been accessed, Vera was already on a train heading south. But this time, they followed. Someone had seen something. And for the first time in her years of resistance work, Vera was not ahead of the danger. She was being hunted. 2 of her network cells were captured and interrogated. One woman, her laundress from Berlin, never talked. Died under questioning. Another agent cracked. Gave them a name, not Vera, not Claire, but a face. And it was enough. The Gestapo didn't know what she had taken. They didn't know what she had seen, but they knew she was still out there. And they wanted her silenced. So Vera went silent. For 6 months, she vanished. No letters, no drops, no sightings. Allies feared the worst, but in truth, she was rebuilding and waiting for the right moment to return. The microfilm reached London in late 1943. The blueprints of Hitler's Fortress Europe laid bare before the Allied command. It changed everything. D-Day wouldn't have looked the same without it. Some historians say it wouldn't have happened at all. Vera was never credited, but she wasn't doing it for medals. She was doing it to win. By 1944, Vera had survived what no one thought possible. She had crossed enemy borders in broad daylight. She had dined with monsters and stolen their secrets while pouring their drinks. She had moved armies with whispers. But what she hadn't yet survived was betrayal. She was operating under a new alias now, Marie Claire, hiding in the southern French countryside among a resistance ring headquartered in an abandoned winery. The group was tight, trusted. Each had their own specialty, decoding signals, forging papers, hiding weapons in wine barrels. And in that circle, there was one man Vera came to depend on, Etienne. He wasn't remarkable at first. A former postal clerk turned courier, he had a limp from a childhood injury and a laugh that didn't quite match his eyes. But he was loyal, or so it seemed. He carried Vera's messages, sometimes over 100 miles on foot. He cracked German code books faster than anyone. He knew how to disappear. And Vera, always careful, always distant, let him in. They shared meals, shared close calls, shared silence when words couldn't explain the weight of what they were doing. Vera didn't believe in love, not in wartime. But trust? That was rarer. And she trusted Etienne. She shouldn't have. It started small, a supply drop that never arrived, a safe house that had clearly been entered. a young messenger boy who was captured and never seen again. Coincidences, they said. But Vera didn't believe in coincidence. She watched, waited. And when she checked the logbooks, she noticed something strange. Etienne had been at each compromised location, always the day before the raid. Still, she hesitated, because if she was wrong, she'd lose the only person she could speak to without a mask. But the truth didn't wait. One night, after a long courier run, Vera returned to the winery to find the cellar ransacked. No sign of her team, just Etienne waiting in the dark with a pistol she recognized. Hers. "I'm sorry," he said, but he wasn't. He wasn't working for the Nazis, not directly. He was working for those who wanted the war to drag on. For profit, for control. Not everything evil wore a swastika. Some wore business suits. Some spoke perfect English. He had sold her location. He said they wouldn't kill her, just silence her, quietly. She was worth more alive. Vera didn't argue, she just moved. A swift jab to his throat knocked him backward. She didn't need a gun, just surprise. She ran, through fields, through fog, for hours. She knew they would follow, knew there were eyes on every road. But she also knew something else. She'd survived worse. She made it to a farmhouse owned by a widow with 2 young sons. Vera told her everything, not her whole name, just the danger. The woman didn't flinch. She hid Vera in the barn, fed her soup, and handed her a radio transmitter buried in hay. For 3 days, Vera tapped out a single sentence. "He is not who he says." It was picked up by British intelligence. Code recognized, extraction approved. By the time the resistance arrived, Etienne was gone. But Vera had already made peace with that. She wasn't chasing revenge, she was preparing for her second strike. Because Hitler was running out of time, and Vera, after everything, was not done yet. The Allies were moving, cities were falling. The war machine that once seemed unstoppable was rusting at its core. And deep in the shadows, Vera was still moving pieces on the board. She had survived betrayal. She had burned through identities like matches. And yet, as 1945 approached, she was preparing to strike again. Not with bombs, not with bullets, but with the last tool she had, truth. It wasn't enough to win the war. She wanted the world to know how it had been won. Because too many names would never be spoken. Too many women buried under the weight of silence, and Vera knew she would be one of them, unless she left something behind. So she wrote. Letters, reports, maps drawn from memory, names of every woman in her network, every man who gave his life, every child who passed a note and never made it home. She wrote their stories on onion paper, hid them in false-bottom suitcases, and smuggled them across borders. Some made it to the British archives, others to family members who had long assumed their daughters and sisters had vanished without a trace. And then came Berlin. April 1945. The Nazis were crumbling, but Hitler's inner circle wasn't finished yet. They had one last plan, a full destruction of evidence, a purge of all intelligence files, names, missions, blueprints of horror. Vera found out by intercepting a signal meant only for the SS. She had 48 hours to stop it. She got to Berlin posing as a nurse in a Red Cross evacuation unit. The city was burning. Tanks rolled over bodies. Buildings collapsed in slow, choking screams. Vera moved through the chaos like a ghost. She slipped into the Reichstag basement at 2:14 a.m. and sabotaged the ignition device meant to burn the archive. The fire never started. Instead, Allied soldiers arrived to find crates of Nazi documents intact, files that would later serve as evidence in the Nuremberg trials. And no one knew it was because of her. Vera disappeared the next morning. No medal, no parade, just a trail of vanishing footprints in the ash of a fallen regime. Some say she moved to Argentina. Others say she returned to the south of France, living under a different name, tending a vineyard, smiling at tourists who would never know the war they'd only read about had been altered by the woman pouring their wine. One declassified file in the 1970s mentioned her code name, Thornbird, a songbird that sings only once in its life just before it dies. But Vera never died. She simply faded. Not into nothing, into everything. She's the reason we know what we know. She's the woman who outsmarted Hitler twice and never looked back. If you're still here, you're part of history now. Remember her. Share her story. And ask yourself, what would you risk if you knew you could change the world? Uncle Luke tells.